Yeah, you're gonna notice that Brian is his screen's frozen. We're trying to don't know what's up with his webcam. I was trying to help him fix it. You can see me in there. It's pretty funny, but he's very much alive and active behind that screen. And Peter's here too. Peter, why don't you kick us off reviewing the sermon from last week and touching on some new thoughts that maybe we didn't get to fully explore.
Well, I think we're just going to share the challenge of last week. So we're looking back at overflow and the danger of wealth. Typically speaking, when we've been looking at abundance and overflow, we've just looked at the topic, explained it, talked about like the dangers or the barriers, and then how we can actually step into it. But with wealth, we've taken it and split it up into two sermons. Big part of it is that the Bible just spends a lot of time, just like this passage in Luke chapter 18, kind of highlighting the dangers and the pitfalls of money. It reminds me of the passage when Jesus is teaching on the Sermon on the Mount and saying, you can only serve one master, money or God. And here we see over and over again in scripture that the way we see and the way we use our wealth is really like a litmus test of faith or how we have experienced grace and abundance. And so I wanted to ask you guys, like, just checking in on kind of the dangers of money and that questions of like how deceived are we or where we have been deceived because Jesus kind of moves from how hard it is to like saying it's impossible. So maybe I would just kind of throw out right out of the gates what what did you guys identify with most when we kind of talked about the dangers of money? I kind of threw out four things. There could be others, but that idea of uh, thinking it's ours and we're not stewards. That idea that money captures our imagination, or that money often distorts our perspective, and sometimes money we equate money with God's favor. Are there any of those that kind of jump out at you? Anything that kind of you felt like, that's really a pitfall for me?
Money capturing the imagination is something that strikes me, and I think that it does because money can captivate your imagination when you are or selfish, self-minded. But even with a sanctified sort of mindset, money can still captivate your imagination. Um, you may imagine all the things you could do for God if you just had a little bit more money, and some of those things may be good and great and right. But money can still, yeah, I think it can still captivate sanctified imagination because you think, man, if only we had more money, we'd be doing more. We could be, and that's still, and you there still can be issues there. And I think that is something that I relate with. I think often about what the different organizations that I've been around. There's always fundraising efforts for that, and it's generally we want to do really good things. Want to bless people, but the love of money can even creep in there, where you're not necessarily trusting God, or you start substituting power of money um, for the power of God. You can forget sometimes that all the most important things often don't require money at all. We can relational get in the way of those things. Anyway, I'll, that's what struck me.
Yeah, when you were talking, it just reminds me that sometimes I feel like I have one foot in one puddle and the other foot in the other puddle, for lack of a better way of putting it. It's almost like that idea of wanting God, but also wanting a little bit of the security of money
Mm.
and things like that. And that's kind of like capturing your imagination. and realizing more and more that when you step into that puddle, it sucks you in more and more and faster. And so there is some truth to Jesus saying you can't serve two masters. Brian, what about you? Was there any of the dangers of money that kind of jumped out at you?
Well, the one thing that definitely spoke to my heart was your comment about how we can be deceived by money or deceived into thinking that we don't have a problem. I know that I've shared at times that when I made a commitment to Christ, that one of the things that almost miraculous was that God took away my love of money. And so I can therefore kind of think like, oh yeah, I don't love money anymore, but I might be, I was challenged to think that I'm somewhat deceived in that area. Just because I, give a certain amount to charity, give of my time and my resources to some extent does not mean that I might not still have an unhealthy foot in that puddle. Uh, yeah, so I was challenged to think about that. It's so easy to compare ourselves to other people and say, "Oh yeah, I I'm generous, and I don't have a problem there." But I don't know. I was really challenged to examine my heart, uh, and I think I realized there is still some love of money that is not healthy.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think that's the subtleness of the danger of money, right? It just kind of creeps in the little ways that we don't notice, and it's kind of a slow creep sometimes. But jumping into the young rich ruler, and I said, it's unique that this of all the stories, Jesus asked the young ruler, "I want, I want all your money. I want you to give it to the poor, and then come follow me." In your lives, has there been kind of like a young rich ruler moment in your life, or have there been a number of them where you feel like Jesus has really asked for something that you may hold dearly and was difficult to let go of as you continued to journey?
I think that
Maybe not so much in the area of money that I can think of examples right now, but in the area of planning, plans, priorities, there have been times where I've had to let go of certain ideas that I had for the future or for situations where God kind of indicated that that was not something that was the right time or whatever, the right place, and had to let go of that. And looking back, I've always been very thankful when I did follow the Lord rather than my own plans. Like later in that passage, he talks about leaving father and mother, um, and that you will be rewarded a hundredfold. That's kind of that sacrifice. And when I made a commitment to Christ to come to Bible school, it was against my father's wishes, but I now am so thankful that I made that commitment, and I have a lot of spiritual fathers in my father's place, so to speak, right? So it was a big sacrifice at the time. It has seemed like a big sacrifice, but I sure see the blessings now.
Absolutely. Like we had said in the sermon, it could be something else, like the woman at the well. It was a relationship with a man or a husband that Jesus points to, right? Just when he's asking her, "Do you want living water?" And she's like, "For sure." The next line is Jesus says, "Go find your husband. Let's talk about this." And I know, when you talk about that, Brian, I could easily think about the number of times that God has asked me to hand over kind of the reins of my life when it comes to career and where I'm going next. And at in those moments, not wanting to trust God, thinking that I think I have a better plan, God, and that my plan is probably maybe not better, but maybe more beneficial to me. And that's how deceptive and subtle it is. I would never sit there, even at that moment, say that I think I'm smarter than God. But somehow, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking if I move down this road, it might actually be more beneficial to me. So, absolutely. Caleb,
Uh, Similar to Brian, I think there have been moments where God has asked me to give, or He's opened my eyes to an opportunity to give financially a different way than I had before, maybe more than I expected. Um, I think God has asked me often, or again, presented opportunities at least, where I've kind of seen pretty clearly that I have an opportunity. I can give here. A lot of times it is time and plans, things, some of those interruptions. Um, you know, I think, yeah, my grandpa Bob, Bob Neufeld, had a saying that said, God's 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 blessing to us or His opportunities for us um, often come as form of interruptions to our most cherished plans. Something along those lines. I can't remember the exact phrase, but that's something that I've experienced in my. And fortunately for me, sometimes I'm very happy for my plans to be shaken up. I'm on a bit of an adventure. Sometimes maybe the bigger challenge can be like sticking to your plan in the face of opportunity. Um, yeah, but no, I've had many times in my life where I've been able to give, and God's asked me, I want these couple months of your life specifically for camp. I remember the very first time camp, something that I resisted. I did not want, and big thing to give up because it meant I had to leave. I had to let go of doing other camps, which I staff in my first summer at Camp Wabash. But it certainly a step forward in plan for me and was.
that's awesome. I was going to ask you guys the last question that I asked the congregation. And that last question is what is your thoughts or feelings about being asked to give more? And the idea was does it feel reasonable or unreasonable? Not whether it was hard or not hard, but that idea, if the thought of being asked to give more, like what is your first inkling or reaction to that? And I'm just going to leave it open because that really is a reflection of our hearts, and it's going to look forward to this coming Sunday as we talk about the actual practice of overflow. So what is your thoughts of being asked to give more? What kind of comes to mind?
Um, there's a quote from I think it's David Livingstone. It's kind of a missionary serving Christ in Africa in the I believe. Anyway, there's a quote. I'm sure it's him. There's a quote where he says, asked towards the end of his life about like what motivated him, how he was able to give so extensively Christ. He said, well, the truth is that I never made a sacrifice. And what he meant was that as much as I gave, it was truly in my own benefit. It was truly something that it benefited me more because of God's presence, God's response to what I gave. And he said, so I actually can't even say that I made a sacrifice because I would trade my life for anything. And that's the sort of phrase that I think motivates me and tells me, yes, if there's an opportunity for more, that is reasonable. And it's reasonable for me to consider that. I think it's reasonable for you to consider how God might benefit you if you stand out, and what other parts of your life. And I mean, this season that I'm in, I'm starting to think, well, God may not want money wise. I may need to be careful, watching how I balance my giving different places, and not they'll keep the lights on at home and stuff like that. But I have more of my heart and more of my mind to share. I think that God is asking me to give more of my the down times of my comfort, be networking or connecting with people, and to be really trying to find ways to be encouraging people. I think there's always ways we can consider how God might, what opportunities might be there before, because we can't take much with us. We can't, the investments that we make relationally, Christ are the things that are the rewards we'll be entering in once life is done.
Yeah, thanks, Caleb. I was really encouraged by how, like, how you responded to that. Everything from, Livingstone and that idea that it was never a sacrifice, but it applies to all areas of our lives, right? There is an overflow. And for me, this question really highlights whether I believe all that I have is mine or all that I have has been given by God. Because that thought, for me, that thought of being asked to give more would be, would be completely reasonable if I knew everything that I own was God's and that God had given it all. And he said, I want you to kind of direct this in such and such a way as a steward. It might seem more unreasonable if I thought my stuff was mine and God was like, well, I want you to do with your stuff this way. Then you have this little, just wave your hand in the air and say, well, what rights do you have, God, to tell me what to do with my stuff? And if I am honest when I'm asked that questions, I know Tara and I have over the years always asked, like, how can we give more? How can we give more? And over the years, we've kind of ramped up little by little. But when I'm asked that question straight up, there's still a little bit of me that kind of pushes back against it. That idea of like, yeah, that is what we desire, but yet there's something broken and still carnal, for lack of a better way of putting it, in my thought. And I would have to say, I have to check my thoughts. It's almost like what Brian said, how easily deceived I am, even though over the years that's the goal that I do have a desire. And yet I also find that there is something else working in me, a more selfish side of me, that when I'm presented with that question, the first response, if I'm honest, is like, I don't know. And so, yeah, it's always wow, how easily and how much denial that I might be in.
I think for me, a couple thoughts. One is it depends who's asking me that question. If I'm willing to give more. If I believe that God is behind it and that he is asking me to make a sacrifice, then I'm much more willing than if it's some organization or individual that I find questionable. Anyway, the other thought is it depends on the area. Like, I find it easier to give more money than time. I'm more selfish with my time, I find, than with my resources. I'll lend out pretty much anything I own, but I if I want to spend the evening at home and somebody stops by or calls and asks for my time, my reaction is, oh, this was not my in my plan for this evening, whatever. So I find it challenging in that area.
Thanks for that response, that honest, like we said, generosity and this idea of abundance and overflow cuts across all areas of our lives. And generosity is reflected in multiple currencies, whether it's our time, it's, as Caleb said, there's more of me to share. right? It kind of cuts across so many different currencies. Was there anything that stood out to you guys? Any questions, any thoughts from last week?
I the the rich young ruler. I want to be careful when I suggest this or mention this, just because I don't want to end up going crosswise with what the intent of the message was. And it's really to look at ourselves and say, how am I like the rich young? That was a big part of what the message. How am I resistant to the call of God on my life? Something else that has been noted by some people there is that there's a very real possibility that one of the reasons Jesus is asking this particular man is to give up everything is because the fact that he was a rich ruler meant that the money and the wealth that he had, it actually had come through exploitation and of others around him. So Jesus was asking him to give up wealth that not kind of in terms of God's law or God's way. It wasn't acquired in a way that was pleasing to God, you could say. And he was living on the benefit of maybe dirty money, you could say. And so Jesus is asking him to let that go so he can follow me. And there are those, and I have experienced this in my past, there are times where I have thought that wealth, as a young person, that wealth is actually, and I don't think that is the case. If you are earning your wealth properly, if you are an upright person, or engaging in business, or you're providing good value, earning wealth for yourself, God's made us to be able to do that, and it's good to be able to earn an income. And I mean, I think about John Wesley, one of the Wesley brothers. Earn as much as you can, work as hard as you can to earn as much as you can, to give as much as you can, so you glorify God as much as you can. And just linking all those things together, saying wealth is a tool. And there's some interesting thoughts there about how Jesus would be asking this particular man to give everything, to start over, basically, because his position in life that he had gained, it wasn't gained through a true way of repentance or God. And I found that very interesting. And the only takeaway from that is that earning money, don't as God leads you, but you don't have to have a negative view of money. Have a neutral money, very, very aware of how it can be used both for good, and how we need talking and surrendering it to God, and how it can be a horrible snare if our love truly is for money. I think the difference there is, if you love money, you're going to see people and you're going to see God through that lens. See God as a way of making money, and you're going to say, how can I monetize my personal interactions? But if you love God, you're going to see, how can I earn my money in a way that's godly? How can I give it in a way that points people to God? And all my relationships are not going to be defined by money. They're going to be defined by that lens of love for God and seeing clearly. Anyway, those are adjacent thoughts that have been filling my mind as part of this sermon as well.
Those are good thoughts, and it just reminds us that wealth, or the lack of wealth, is not equal to God's favor or God's disfavor, right? That throughout the scriptures and throughout history, there are people who are very wealthy who are unrighteous. We can name the kings of old, Pharaoh and things like that, but there are people who are righteous, who are wealthy. And we can say the same about those who are poor, right? Those who don't have a lot of means, who are righteous, who want to honor God, who share their belongings. And there are those who don't have wealth and who are unrighteous, and they still hoard, and they still are greedy. They still have that love of money. It's still And so you cannot use simply whether someone has or has not as a measure of whether or not they are righteous or not righteous, whether they love God or not love God. And so that's a good point. Any other thoughts as we kind of wrap up?
Just one little story that I was reminded of. I don't know if I've shared it here before, but early in our marriage, we were in a life group, in a care group with a few other young couples here at McLaurin. And one time during our meeting, we and another couple shared that things were really tight financially, and there was still a little bit to go in the month. Um, and after the meeting, Tracy and I felt like we should give our last $50 to this other couple. And the neat thing was, they felt the same thing and gave their last $50 to us in a card, as we gave them a card with our last $50. And so neither one of us was any poorer, but we were both blessed out of our socks for being blessed like that by the other couple. Anyway, God proved to be faithful in a funny way.
That's an amazing story. That's so good.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think we can add any more to that than that.
I will add something that I'm just looking. I see comments here on Living in the Scriptures, or at Life at Lauren, for anyone who's watching the video. Dennis just commented and said that I like the comment that generosity cuts across multiple currencies, and I can be generous if I'm in control of my generosity. I can work giving into my budget and my schedule. The idea of when it comes to generosity, it's a discipline that you gain. If you're in control of it, then you can actually do it. You can grow it as God calls. An opportunity to think about scheduled, planned generosity instead of sporadic, and just thinking about the whole picture of your. Anyway, I thought it was a good comment. I wanted to acknowledge
I think
to
that's
contribute. So
I think that's a great comment. And one of the things is that um, I might insult a few people when I say that generosity is not a random act of kindness. It is a consistent and growing desire for the goodness and kindness and passion for another person. Sometimes like we kind of pat ourselves on the back about a random act of kindness, but hopefully you do multiple acts of kindness, lots of random acts, and that would be generosity, right? And I think I like that comment about, like, we can grow it. There's a discipline behind it, and that our hearts will grow when we step into. That's awesome. Thank you for that comment. But that's all that I have. Blessings. Thanks for joining us for Living in the Scriptures Live, and this is Life here at McLaurin. Blessings.
love you guys. See you later.
Amen.